Get started now. The film, I always try to recommend film versions to you. So for Midsummer Night's Dream, which you'll pardon me for abbreviating, but I get tired writing the title, there's a version from the 1960s with Peter Hall directing. It's quite good. It has its dated aspects. It's a little bit too 60s, but it has an extraordinary cast on the women's side. In one film, we've got Diana Rigg, Helen Mirren, and Judi Dench. And so the women's parts you'll never see better. And Bilbo Baggins plays Puck. Ian Holm is Puck in the film. So I do recommend it. I will say that little musical background never hurts here in A Midsummer Night's Dream. There is an extraordinary version from the 1930s directed by the great German stage director, Max Reinhardt. I always mention odd casting, and this is the oddest cast film ever. I don't know if these names will mean anything to you, but James Cagney plays Bottom, and Mickey Rooney plays Puck. It's not a very good version, actually, with all the talent in it, but it's worth it alone to see a very young Mickey Rooney overacting as Puck and James Cagney appropriately overacting as Bottom. Did you all get that second paper assignment? Did that get through to people? It looked like it did. I did print up some hard copies. If anyone would prefer a hard copy, I got a couple of them here. The topics are similar to the first set. You will be getting your papers back in section this week. But if you have any questions about the paper topics, let me know. Again, if you want to write on a topic of your own, clear it with Mr. Salinger. And you're always welcome to talk to me about paper topics. I rather enjoy it, in fact. We're going to dwell a little longer on Midsummer Night's Dream. I will still be lecturing on it on Thursday. We will probably get to As You Like It on Thursday, but I'll honestly say you don't have to have it read by Thursday, because I'm really not going to get to it in substance till next week. I really want to exploit this opportunity that Shakespeare has given us with Romeo and Juliet and Midsummer Night's Dream. Here he's written a comedy and a tragedy on the same subject, and it really is a marvelous opportunity to try to figure out what the distinction between comedy and tragedy is. I wanted finally to read from you the passage from Plato's Symposium that Shakespeare may have known of, or at least had in mind, have heard of, that is at the very end of the symposium, which means at the end of an all-night drinking party. That's what symposium means in Greek. Everybody's drunk and everybody's staggering around or passed out. Only Socrates is still sober. And the narrator reports that he vaguely heard Socrates arguing that, and now I quote, the genius of comedy was the same with that of tragedy, and that the true artist in tragedy was an artist in comedy also. And this has been read by many people as a kind of prediction of Shakespeare, and maybe he knew Plato had said this and was trying to show that he could do it. So just to finish up quickly on Romeo and Juliet, and as a transition to Midsummer Night's Dream, I hope that my discussion of Romeo and Juliet illustrated the virtues of a political approach to Shakespeare. I think it helps us to look at aspects of the play that are often neglected. For example, we can spot the problem in Verona, that the spiritedness of the young men has no outlet. Do remember that Shakespeare wrote Richard II at approximately the same time as Romeo and Juliet, and in both plays, the young, spirited men of the community don't have any wars to fight, and so they start fighting each other. And the consequences are a kind of civil war in England and a kind of civil war in Verona. Most importantly, I think, having studied the history plays, we're alerted to the problem of religion and politics, and especially to the issue that was very important to Shakespeare of the church interfering in matters of state. That made me, and I hope you, look at the peculiar role of the friar in the play. To my knowledge, I've never seen anyone question the friar's role in the play. If anything, there are essays about what a wonderful man the friar is. Well, coming at it from Machiavelli's perspective, or even from what we saw in the history plays, we can see the friar's conduct with Juliet is absolutely unacceptable and unjustified. There's no grounds on which he can justify leaving Juliet alone in those circumstances other than his own safety, which is what he has in mind. So anyway, I do think that the political approach helps us in those regards. Let me say some final words about tragedy in Romeo and Juliet, again, to set up what we're doing in A Midsummer Night's Dream. If you do have Romeo and Juliet with you, turn to page 58, which is Act 2, Scene 6, about line 3. Shakespeare sets up an exchange between Romeo and the friar, which encapsulates the whole distinction between tragedy and comedy. Romeo says, "But come what sorrow can, it cannot countervail the exchange of joy that one short minute gives me in her sight. Do thou but close our hands with holy words, then love-devouring death do what he dare. It is enough I may but call her mine." Now that is Achilles' choice again, the choice that Hotspur makes, the choice of something brief and glorious over something long and boring, namely life. Here's how the tragic hero commits himself to death. He wants that exchange of joy that one short minute can give him, and for that he'll accept death. And the friar says these violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die like fire and powder, which as they kiss consume. The sweetest honey is loathsome in his own deliciousness, and in the taste confounds the appetite. Therefore love moderately, love long love does so, too swift arrives, as tardy as too slow. Love moderately. The friar is advocating a more conventional form of life here, and you want a long love, not a brief, intense love that ends in death, but a long love that you can savor. This is the comic view of life. Again, as we've seen, the tragic hero chooses his values or his principles over death. The comic figure chooses life over any kind of principle here. This is where you can see how to apply Hegel's theory of tragedy to Romeo and Juliet. You really do see the two goods of a Hegelian tragedy in the dialogue between the friar and Romeo here. Romeo stands for the greatness of a love that transcends the city and the conventional, of a love in which you prove that you're such a great lover you will die for your beloved. That's the sense in which the story of Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy waiting to happen. The friar stands for that whole other set of values in the play. The more conventional values, the value of family, of long life, of children, the whole conventional world of Verona there. And we see the hero making the tragic choice here. This is the way we could bring together the Aristotelian theory of tragedy and the Hegelian. The Aristotelian theory concentrates on the tragic hero. Hegel concentrates on the tragic situation. And what we see here is we need both. What makes for tragedy is a tragic hero in a tragic situation. Now, Shakespeare actually had to search for a tragic situation here because, as I've said, young love was the subject of comedy in the ancient world, and to make it a subject of tragedy, Shakespeare drew upon the medieval tradition of courtly love, where love had been blended with religion, the language of religion had been applied to love, a kind of religious dimension was found in love, which turned love into a new kind of absolute that then could be contrasted with other values, and someone could die for the sake of love, and that's what Shakespeare shows. So you now have a situation here where on one hand are the values of conventional family life in Verona, on the other hand this new kind of courtly love, this absolute love. You still need someone to make the choice, though. You can imagine a situation where there's nobody around who's brave enough to act the way Romeo and Juliet do. You can say this is an option, but it will still distinguish, you still have to distinguish between those who will make the tragic choice, who will have the integrity to stand up for their principles even at the price of death. It happens in Hegel's favorite tragedy. Antigone has a sister named Ismene, and she's in the exact same situation as Antigone because it's their brother who's been a traitor to the city and is lying unburied. Well, Antigone is famous because she's the tragic heroine and chooses death. Basically, no one's heard of Ismene anymore, even though she's in the play, because she says to her sister, "You're out of your mind. We can't die for this. Yeah, I'd like to bury him, but, we're going to be dead if we do this." And so there are always the Ismenes of the world, and then there are the Antigones. And so it really does, you need this kind of tragic situation, but you need a certain heroic form of humanity to trigger the tragedy. One could also imagine the opposite, where you had a tragic hero but no tragic situation, where you had someone who had the potential to be a tragic hero or heroine and just doesn't encounter this kind of situation that forces him or her to make this kind of choice. It is important to see that in Shakespeare, destiny is character plus circumstances. Again, the kind of myth of Romeo and Juliet is this was all fated. These are just star-crossed lovers. But in fact, of course, other lovers in their situation, we'd have no tragedy. As I tried to show you, they're deeply death-devoted. They're looking to die because they're looking to prove something about their love. Again, that's the way I reconcile the Aristotle's theory and Hegel's, that you're always looking for both sides of the equation, the tragic hero in the tragic situation. Now, let's move on to Midsummer Night's Dream and show how all the opposite things prevail in the world of comedy. Now, this is, I think, Shakespeare's funniest play. When staged, is absolutely hilarious, and it's a marvelous achievement of comedy. I think people underrate it. They don't think it's King Lear or Hamlet, and I admit that it's not. But I do think we have a certain prejudice against comedy, and I'm going to try to show you that this is a genuinely profound play and maybe one of the most interesting things Shakespeare wrote. One interesting thing about it is that it's one of 3 plays where he had no source, the other 2 being Love's Labour's Lost and The Tempest. That is, these are the only 3 plays in which we can't find another play on which the whole story was based, or in the case of Romeo and Juliet, a poem on which was based. Shakespeare takes elements from Ovid, for example, and English folklore, and one can see where the pieces come from, but no one ever put them together in this way. And it's as good as an episode of Seinfeld, and maybe even better. That is, it juxtaposes 4 plot lines and then weaves them together in the end. So at the end, everybody in the play is on the stage at once. Now, it's interesting how the plots are related and the overall structure of the play. That is, the main plot is the story of the lovers, Hermia and Lysander, Helena and Demetrius, and that's the central plot of the play, and that's what it's about, and a play about young love. But the play also has an overplot and an underplot, somewhat the way the Henry IV plays do. The underplot is the story of Bottom and Snout and the Peter Quince and these so-called rude mechanicals who are putting on a play themselves. The overplot is interesting because it's bifurcated. It's the story of Hippolyta and Theseus, but also of Oberon and Titania. That is, the background of the story and sort of the overarching shaper of the plot is that Theseus is about to marry the Amazon queen Hippolyta. That's then joined with a story of another set of rulers, the rulers of the fairy world, Oberon and Titania, and they're in an argument over an Indian boy. And that argument affects the plot in many ways because it just causes a chaos in nature. Now, you can immediately see that these plots are social in their hierarchy. Bottom is at the bottom. Bottom and his friends are at the bottom of the social hierarchy. The lovers are in the middle. And at the top are Duke Theseus and Hippolyta, and also the king and queen of the fairies, Oberon and Titania. And what happens then is a lot of productive contrasts can be developed from this, as we saw happen in the Henry IV plays. That is, at one and the same time, Shakespeare is comparing and contrasting these groups. We'll see ways in which Bottom is obviously distinguished from Duke Theseus, but ways in which he might be being acquainted with him. And above all, there's the interesting fact that we'll get to on Thursday, that the ruling class in this play is divided. There are two overplots. There's Theseus and Hippolyta on one side and Oberon and Titania on the other. And who really rules Athens in the deepest sense is somehow left open, and we'll have to explore that. So it's remarkably structured. And each one of these four plots affects the outcome of the others. It's, again, absolutely brilliant how Shakespeare weaves these things together, and seamlessly in a way that we don't even notice how brilliantly it's handled. All right, so now how do we get a comedy out of a tragedy here? Well, as I suggested last time, just double the lovers. Tragedy rests on the uniqueness and the greatness of the figures involved, and we must think that Romeo and Juliet are something special to have a tragic feeling about that play. As soon as they're doubled, the characters lose their uniqueness, and I'm a professional and know that it's Hermia and Lysander and Demetrius and Helena, but you'll never remember it. It took me 2 decades before I could keep them solidly straight in my mind, and that's Shakespeare's intention. That they really are indistinguishable. And indeed, that's the problem they face. They are trying to distinguish themselves in a world in which they're in fact indistinguishable. Just give you some of the references on that. If you turn to page 5 in A Midsummer Night's Dream, when Theseus is trying to get Hermia to marry Demetrius, he says, this is Act 1, Scene 1, about line 52, Demetrius is a worthy gentleman, and Hermia answers, so is Lysander. And that's the equation of the two. And it's what Lysander asserts on the next page, page 6 to 7, so still Act 1, Scene 1, about line 99, as he's arguing with Hermia's father. I am my, father is saying, Demetrius, I am, my lord, as well derived as he, as well possessed. My love is more than his. My fortunes every way is fairly ranked, if not with vantage, as Demetrius, and which is more than all these boasts can be. I am beloved of beauteous Hermia. So again, the constant insistence that the characters are really the same. It's similar with the women. This is at page 11. So Act 1, Scene 1, line 226. Helen says, how happy some can be. Through Athens I am thought as fair as she. Just as good looking as she is. Why this big deal over Hermia? And in general, we will see later when they distinguish themselves, it's on a fairly trivial basis, at least one that's not too related to love, namely on height. One of them is taller than the other. So this is the world of averageness that we've entered here in the world of a tragedy. in a way, Tolstoy could help us out here. The famous opening line of his novel, Anna Karenina: all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. That's a wonderful guide to the world of comedy and tragedy, that all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Now, the problem for happy people, for people as in a comedy, is they then feel undifferentiated. Everybody wants to be special, and in a way, we see the price for their happiness is that they're undifferentiated, that there's nothing special about them. So in fact, we see that even fairly ordinary people want to be in tragedies. They want to have that tragic distinction. So if you turn to page 8, this is Act 1, Scene 1, you'll see that in fact, Hermia and Lysander are seeking out a tragic love. This is, again, Act 1, Scene 1, about line 134. The course of true love never did run smooth. They want a tragedy. They sense this can't be a true love if it goes too smoothly. And then they rattle off a whole bunch of causes of tragic loves, but either was different in blood, O cross, too high to be enthralled too low, or else misgrafted in respective years, O spite, too old to be engaged too young, or else it stood upon the choice of friends, O hell, to choose love by another's eyes. And then Lysander says, or if there were sympathy and choice, war, death, or sickness did lay siege to it, making it momentaneous as a sound, swift as a shadow, short as any dream, brief as the lightning in the collied night. Now, if you have your Romeo and Juliet with you, turn to page 40. Shakespeare makes these plays echo each other. You'll remember this passage, perhaps Act 2, Scene 2, where Juliet says of their sudden love, this is Act 2, Scene 2, about line 118, it is too rash, too unadvised, and too sudden, too like the lightning, which doth cease to be ere one can say it lightens. Here you can say Hermia and Lysander are trying to assimilate their experience to that of Romeo and Juliet. They're invoking the world of tragic love, the world of a sudden, brilliant flaring up of emotion, like the lightning. And of course, they see it as a dream. And we saw there was something dreamlike about Romeo and Juliet's experience that then became very problematic for them, as we'll see happen here as well. So in fact, the characters in a comedy think they're in a tragedy. They think they're very special and unique, and their love is unlike any other love that's ever been. If they remain true to that, their story would end up tragically. But you see, what's happening here is they're in fact dissatisfied with the world of ordinary life, just as Romeo and Juliet are. They don't feel comfortable being just like everybody else, but that's the situation they're in. So they look to distinguish themselves through love. And here's the interesting point. Especially for the men here, their thumos gets invested in their eros. That's what really complicates life in the world of this tragedy. Now again, this is a play like Romeo and Juliet, and where they're shut off from warfare. Warfare's in the past. Theseus's wars with the Amazons have ended, and there's no talk of an outlet as warriors for these young men. They still have that thumos, and they're still competitive. And remember, in the middle of the play, they're trying to kill each other. Lysander and Demetrius have first they're both in love with Hermia, then they're both in love with Helena. In any case, they're competitive. Love has become their new form of competition. They can't compete on the battlefield, so they'll compete in the bedroom. Who gets the most beautiful woman, the most desirable woman in Athens? And now here I'm going to make what I hope will be a tantalizing suggestion. it looks to us as if they fall in love with the same woman and then become competitive. But let me toss out the alternative suggestion that because they're competitive, they fall in love with the same woman. They're looking to compete. They're looking for a fight. In the absence of fighting on a battlefield, they'll fight over a woman. Now, this is the theory of a man named René Girard. He's written a book on Shakespeare called Theater of Envy, which I highly recommend, especially the chapters on Midsummer Night's Dream. He developed a theory based largely on reading the French novels of the 19th century, a theory of what he calls mimetic desire or triangular desire. This he develops in a book called Deceit, Desire, and the Novel. Another one of his major books, it's a useful introduction to his theory, is Violence and the Sacred. This book presents itself as demystifying the myth of love in Western civilization. It's actually interesting, related in interesting ways to Denis de Rougemont's writings. What he argues is that desire is learned, that we think of desire as spontaneous, as it's presented in courtly love poetry, love at first sight. You just see this woman and you're overwhelmed by her beauty. What Girard argues is that men are competitive, and one form in which they compete is the erotic field. His thinking is really wide-ranging. It goes into psychoanalysis. It goes into anthropology. I'll just give you very briefly the way he overturns Sigmund Freud and the notion of the Oedipus complex. I think that will help you understand his theory overall. The Freudian theory, of course, is that the young boy falls in love with his mother and therefore enters into competition with his father. Girard turns that on its head. He says the young boy and his father are competitive in primary form. That's the primary form, is the competition between the young boy and his father. And as a result of that competition, the young boy wants the father, what the father has, namely the mother. Now, far be it from me to adjudicate between Sigmund Freud and René Girard, but I'm just offering this alternate theory because I think Girard is right that Shakespeare has this idea, especially in the romantic comedies. That is, what Shakespeare is showing is that desire is learned. Now, partially it's learned from poetry, as we've been seeing, all this stuff with Petrarch, but it's also a sense that young men are seeking to compete, and the way they compete is to get the most beautiful woman in Verona, or the most beautiful woman in Athens here. And similarly, the women want to distinguish themselves. That is, to be beloved by a man. So what you have here is the idea that the only thing, you start with a world that's undifferentiated, in which people feel they're mediocre because they have nothing unique about them. It's then desire that distinguishes them. That's the main point made again and again about erotic desire in the play. Look at page 5. So Act 1, Scene 1, about line 55, when Theseus says to Hermia, "The other must be held the worthier," and Hermia says, "I would my father look but with my eyes." And that's the emphasis again and again, the subjectivity of vision. Page 8, Act 1, Scene 1, about line 140, where Hermia says, "Oh, hell, to choose love by another's eyes." Or page 11, where we get to the key of it, Act 1, Scene 1, about line 232. "Things base and vile, holding no quantity, love can transform to form and dignity. Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid played by." Things base and vile, holding no quantity, love can transform to form and dignity. this is the great myth of love in the courtly love tradition, that it can take ordinary people and transfigure them. It can make them noble. It can make them worthy of tragic treatment here. And so that's what we see in this play, the magical force of mimetic desire, that takes an ordinary woman or an ordinary man, turns her into a goddess, turns him into a god, and then suddenly people feel they have a real status and a real dignity in this world. Now, it's a potentially destructive force, just as we've seen any form of nobility is in Shakespeare, because now people have something to fight to the death over. And again, I'll remind you that at the center of this play, Demetrius and Lysander are at each other's throats and willing to destroy each other. And it creates a kind of chaos. Girard calls this the sacrificial crisis in his book, Violence and the Sacred, that you begin with a world that's in order, and then this mimetic desire brings everyone into competition. They all want to imitate each other. By the way, that's strong even with the women in this play. If you look at page 9, this is Hermia speaking, page 9, Act 1, Scene 1, about line 185, speaking of Hermia, your eyes are lodestars, and your tongue, sweet air, more tunable than lark to shepherd's ear. When wheat is green, when hawthorn's buds appear, sickness is catching. Oh, were favor so, yours would I catch, fair Helena, ere I go. My ear should catch your voice, my eye your eye. She wants to be Helena. This comes up again on page 10. Where she says that she'd like to, this is about line 197 in Act 1, Scene 1. His folly, Helena, is no fault of mine. None but your beauty, would that fault were mine. This is what, Girard's a Frenchman, and the French specialize in envy, and so he really does know this phenomenon at his heart. And again, he discovered it in the 19th century French novel, in Balzac and Stendhal, ultimately in Proust. That is, this feeling people have that someone else is happier than they are. We have proverbs, the grass is always greener in someone else's yard. We have the phrase, keeping up with the Joneses. I might point out that all advertising is based on mimetic desire, of putting some celebrity up there and making us think that because Matthew McConaughey drives a Lincoln, if we drive a Lincoln, we'll be HBO stars. That's mimetic desire for you right there. But here, you see in these characters this deep feeling, I'm ordinary, nobody cares about me, there's nothing to distinguish me. Here's this woman, everybody in Athens loves her, Demetrius loves her, Lysander loves her. Why can't I be like Mike? As the old aunts used to be about Michael Jordan. I mean, why can't I be like this other person? I would be happy if I were like this other person. And what does being like the other person mean? Having what that other person has. Hermia has Lysander and Demetrius. So Helena wants Lysander and Demetrius. It's a formula for conflict. You focus on limited goods because you just want the sense of limited good. There could be nothing special about Hermia or Helena, or nothing special about Demetrius or Lysander. The point is, one of them is the love god in Athens, and everybody wants to be the love god. And so the result in the center of the play is chaos. Now again, this play is structured like the history plays. It begins with a form of order. It then moves to a form of disorder, and order is reestablished at the end. Now that's pretty much the formula for any play. It's a very dramatic structure for a play, but it's one that Shakespeare particularly likes to use. And we see at the beginning of this play, we're in a fairly hierarchical world in Athens. Duke Theseus is presiding over it. We have these various Athenians. Everyone's in its place, and in particular, there are a number of categories that are well defined in the city, and they're quite prominent at the beginning. There's parents and children, and Aegeus is asserting the authority of a parent over a child. There are men and women, and specifically there are husbands and wives, with Theseus talking about his upcoming wedding in the opening lines of the play, and then we see that there's this issue, who is Hermia going to get married? And these are the categories on which communities are founded. Some of the most basic categories: parents and children, men and women, specifically husbands and wives. These are the things that order a community. And things seem pretty ordered in Athens, just a little bit is out of whack at the beginning. Hermia's disobeying her father and not willing to marry the man he wants her to. We also learn that in the fairy world, Oberon and Titania are at odds over this Indian boy. So there are a few cracks in the order of Athens, but they open up a flood of chaos in this world. By the middle of the play, all hell is broken loose. The Demetrius and Lysander are at each other's throats. The queen of the fairies is in love with an ass. I mean, it's just, all the categories are getting inverted in the play, and order is breaking down. And it will be the point of Shakespeare to return these figures to order at the end of the play, and it's a happy order because this is a comedy. But we have to be threatened with disorder in the middle of the play. Now, the disordering force is basically eros. It is love, and particularly the Petrarchan convention of love at first sight. A good example of that is on page 46. When this is Act 3, Scene 2, about line 135, where Demetrius, who up to now has been claiming he loves Hermia, not Helena, awakes, and we get this outpouring of Petrarchan language. Again, Act 3, Scene 2, about line 138. O Helen, goddess, nymph, perfect divine, to what my love shall I compare thine eye? Crystal is muddy, oh how ripe and show, thy lips those kissing cherries tempting grow, the pure congealed white high Tara snow, fanned with the eastern wind turns to a crow, when thou holdst up thy hand, oh let me kiss the princess of pure white, the seal of bliss. Notice these lines rhyme, and there's more rhyme poetry in this play than in any other of Shakespeare's plays, and it is an attempt to show poetry as a self-conscious medium in this play. These characters are living in the world of poetry, and all this imagery here of goddesses and nymphs being divine, and all this celebration of whiteness here, the pure skin, the kissing cherries, these are all straight out of Petrarchan love poetry, the kind of thing Shakespeare makes fun of in that Sonnet 130 I read to you. And above all, this is love at first sight. He just wakes up, sees Helena, and he's in love with her. Now we know he used to be in love with her, but up to now he's been in love with Hermia, and suddenly he's in love with Helena. And indeed, this crazy love juice, it's a symbol of love at first sight. The whole point of this juice that Oberon has come up with is that you put it on someone's eyes, and the first person that person sees, he or she falls in love with. It really is the pharmacological equivalent of the Petrarchan convention of love at first sight. And it drives the people crazy. What we see in this play is that Eros is a tremendously disruptive force in the political community. So much so that it almost undermines the political community and lands it in a kind of civil war in the play. Now, what the lovers get, in some sense, is what they asked for. And they enter a dream world and a night world. It's the same imagery we saw in Romeo and Juliet, that the world of Eros is associated with the night, with the moon, and with dreams, similar to what we saw with Falstaff's world in Henry IV, Part 1, that there too there was this sense, there's this alternate universe. There's the established political community with its conventions and its laws, and now here's a world in which all of that lapses and people are free to indulge their desires. The play begins with the invocation of the Athenian law. That's what Aegeus is there for, to appeal to the Duke to enforce the law of a father on the child. And we do see again, this is initially, as in Romeo and Juliet, a world ruled by fathers, and in general, a world ruled by old men. And the youth feel oppressed in it. It's the standard formula for comedy, Roman comedy, film comedy to this day, a story of a world that's ruled by various old authority figures, and boys and girls just want to have fun. They feel inhibited by the rules, by the conventions. They can't understand why they should have to follow these rules when they could just be having fun. And the comedy allows them to do that. On page 4, bottom of page 4, Act 1, Scene 1, about line 41, Aegeus says, "I beg the ancient privilege of Athens." And indeed, it's ancient. It's the ancient law that puts the fathers in charge. What seems hopeful to Lysander is bottom of page 8, so Act 1, Scene 1, about line 162. There, gentle Hermia, he's got an aunt who lives 7 leagues from Athens, and line 161, "There, gentle Hermia, may I marry thee, and to that place the sharp Athenian law cannot pursue us." There's a space outside the law in this play. There wasn't in Romeo and Juliet. There is no world outside Verona's walls, Romeo complained. The Catholic friar carved out a little sanctuary for Romeo and Juliet within the city, but it didn't work out as he had hoped. But the difference between Midsummer Night's Dream and Romeo and Juliet is that there's a forest outside Athens. And I think it's quite appropriate that it be a forest. It's a more natural world. It's a world in which the characters can get closer to nature. Romeo and Juliet takes place in a world of walled cities, Verona, Mantua, and there's no space outside the city that the lovers can withdraw to. It is in the nature of several Shakespeare's comedies that there is such a space outside the political community, and it's usually a forest. We'll see this immediately in As You Like It in the Forest of Arden. The great critic Northrop Frye has called this Shakespeare's green world. The play begins in the world of convention and of law and of ancient privilege, and in this comic world, the lovers are going to be free to enter a more natural world. Again, a forest, a world no longer of walls and of a walled city. And the sense is that the city is out of touch with nature at the beginning of the play, that it's gotten old. It's fallen into habits. One of those habits is the idea that fathers can order around their daughters. This is on page 5. So Act 1, Scene 1, about line 48, where Theseus says to Hermia, "To you your father should be as a god, one that composed your beauties, yea, and one to whom you are but as a form of wax, by him imprinted, and within his power to leave the figure or disfigure it." Aegeus created Hermia. She's got to listen to him. Well, I got news for Theseus. There was a Mrs. Aegeus involved in this process. And you see here how the city is out of touch with nature, that is neglecting the role of women in procreation. That the father creates the daughter, therefore he can order him to do whatever he wants her to do. Where's mom here? She surely had a role in this creation. Hermia is not a ball of wax, and Aegeus is not a sculptor creating Hermia out of nothing. And so what's happened here, the city is not allowing Eros any play here. It's a world of old men who think they can tell young people who will marry whom. And that leads to a kind of order, but it's not satisfactory to the young people. So fortunately, they have an escape here into the forest and into a kind of play world in which they can act out their desires and experiment with them in a relatively safe world, although we'll see it quickly becomes dangerous. And in particular, in which they can escape the social pressures of the community, which try to define their love and tell them whom to marry. Now, we saw a bit of this in Henry IV, Part 1. Hal's Forest was the taverns of Eastcheap. It was a Boar's Head tavern. It was a world where he could escape the pressures of the court and play act. And we saw how important that was for Hal to be able to sow his oats and get some of the steam off and experiment, play at being his father, for example. And all that world was associated with something that was antinomian, thieves like Falstaff. And we saw how it involved redefining thieves into gentlemen and reordering the order of the sun and the moon and so on. Something very similar to here. Another way to see it is the opening scene between Romeo and Juliet where they are wearing masks. And masks are very liberating. Indeed, nothing could have happened in that scene if they hadn't come in wearing masks. If Romeo comes in unmasked, he's thrown out immediately by the Capulet bouncer, who no doubt would be at the door with the guest list, and no Montagues allowed at a Capulet party. The masks liberate them. And this is what masks do. They liberate people from their conventional identities. This is the whole spirit of carnival. In Romeo and Juliet's case, remember she says, the mask of night is on my face. So much has to do with the fact that they meet in mask conditions, in night conditions, where they're not forced to live by the normal daylight rules of Verona. And indeed, Shakespeare's comedy very much has a carnival spirit. One of the best books on Shakespearean comedy is by a man named C.L. Barber, and it's called Shakespeare's Festive Comedy. And he compared the structure of Shakespeare's comedies to a number of folk rituals in Renaissance Europe, to the idea of carnival, the so-called Lord of Misrule. There's a great book on carnival by the scholar M.M. Bakhtin in his book on Rabelais and his world. The term carnivalesque has really taken off in literary criticism. It's the idea of the world where for a couple of days a year, the normal social rules are suspended, so that so-called institution of the Lord of Misrule, some really low-life character like Bottom would be chosen and made king for a day in a ceremony. If you know Victor Hugo's Notre Dame novel, it's what happens to Quasimodo in that book. The idea is that people get really pent up in the world of virtuous society. They're forced to play by the rules most of the year. Maybe give them a week, Carnival. Give them a week when they can party like it's $13.99. Let them celebrate the excesses of the body. Let them eat and drink and whatever else they might want to do. And there is that carnivalesque spirit in Shakespeare's comedies. We'll see it again in As You Like It and in Twelfth Night. That is, people are pressured under these rules. They need a space in which the rules are suspended and which they can play out their desires and indulge them. And what they want is a sense of true love, a kind of true experience of love away from all these things that the city tries to impose upon them. Lovers want to love each other out of pure love and not for any external reasons. It's the great challenge to love to avoid being mercenary. Someone say, I don't want him to marry me for my money, or I don't want him to marry me because my father is president of the United States, or something like that. Marriage is a complicated thing, and love is a complicated thing. And there are many factors that maybe work on it. And you can say the myth of pure love is that love is its own justification, that there are no prudential reasons for loving, that love is somehow corrupted or diluted when it is based on something other than pure love. And you can see the attractiveness of tragedy here to Romeo and Juliet. They prove their love is pure because it's so imprudent and irrational. They have every reason not to love each other. The nurse says of Juliet at one point, he that loves her shall have the chinks, meaning lots of money. She's a rich merchant's daughter, so everybody in Verona wants to marry her, but she doesn't want to be married for money. So you can say she seeks out the one man who, if she marries him, she'll be disinherited. Romeo can't marry Juliet for the money because old man Capulet will never let a Montague have a big dowry. And so on right down the line. Everything in that play points Romeo and Juliet to marrying anyone but each other. All the prudent reasons are in favor of, say, Juliet marrying County Paris, for example. He's a worthy gentleman, and so on. The lovers want something where the love is not compromised by these external considerations. And Romeo and Juliet have that. They have to sacrifice everything in their lives for their love. They have to give up everything for it. And so they know they love each other because they love each other, and not for any financial considerations, not for any political considerations. And Shakespeare does play with this in the play, because love becomes sufficient reason in this play. This is in Act 2, Scene 2. So page 30, Act 2, Scene 2. This is the moment when Lysander wakes up, and because of the love juice, he's fallen in love with Helena. This actually occurs before the moment I showed you with Demetrius. But she's just saying to him, if you live, good sir, wake, And he wakes up, and run through fire I will for thy sweet sake. Transparent Helena, nature shows art, that through thy bosom makes me see thy heart. Whereas Demetrius, oh, fit a word is that vile name to perish on my sword. Notice his first thought is, oh, I'm in love with her now. I'm going to have to fight with Demetrius over her. And Helena is surprised by this. I thought you loved Hermia. And he says, line 111, content with Hermia? No, I do repent the tedious minutes I with her have spent. Not Hermia, but Helena I love. Who will not change a raven for a dove? The will of man is by his reason swayed, and reason says you are the worthier maid. Things growing are not ripe until their season, so I being young till now, ripe not to reason, and touching now the point of human skill, reason becomes the marshal to my will. Now this is the most irrational thing possible. It's pharmacologically induced. It has nothing to do with his conscious mind as we understand it. We thought he was desperately in love with Hermia. Now suddenly he's in love with Helena. It's as irrational as you get, but that means it's the love of pure reason here. His only reason for loving Helena now is that he loves Helena. I think Shakespeare is heavily ironic here in having the use of the word reason here, because this is pure eros. This is there's nothing reasonable about this. In fact, Shakespeare makes fun of this on page 38. So Act 3, Scene 1, about line 143. We'll talk about the love of Titania and Bottom in a minute, but here an even more irrational love, also produced by the love juice, and a similar moment when Titania wakes, she falls in love with this guy with an ass's head on, and line 143 in Act 3, Scene 1, methinks, mistress, you should have little reason for that, when she says, I love thee. And yet, to say the truth, reason and love keep little company together nowadays. And that's Shakespeare's sense. But I mean, eros is the most irrational force. It's what makes life fun. It's also what makes life crazy. But the curious thing here is this is what the lovers desire. They really want an irrational love. A rational love seems too prudent, seems compromised. Does he really love me, or does he love my money? Does he really love me, or does he love my status? That sort of thing. And so love is always veering towards the irrational, or the world where love would be sufficient reason, where the only reason you need to love someone is that you love that person. And it's not tainted by any mercenary considerations. And these lovers get that. And they get it in this strange night world, this strange dream world. It's a world where their dreams come true. And then they find dreams aren't as good as they're cracked up to be. I mean, just think of these moments with Helena. At the beginning of the play, she's complaining that Hermia is the love god of Athens. Everybody loves her, not me. And then suddenly she gets her dream come true. She's the love goddess in Athens. All the men start loving her. First Lysander, and then Demetrius. And Demetrius, she should believe that. She knows he once did love her. It's not all that implausible, really, based on her experience. This man did love her. And so this is what she wanted. She wanted Demetrius to love her. And there it is, he does. And she can't accept it. Because it's too sudden. And it's too crazy. And it's too irrational. This is where you say that love is some strange creature in between pure rationality and pure irrationality. In some ways, lovers would like it to be purely irrational, and yet when they're confronted with a purely irrational love, it frightens them because it's so irrational. Remember, Romeo was troubled by the dreamlike quality of his love. That's back on page 40 in Romeo and Juliet, Act 2, Scene 2, line 139. Oh, blessed, blessed night, I am afeard, being a night, all this is but a dream, too flattering, sweet to be substantial. We saw this even with Romeo and Juliet. When their dreams came true in this night world, in this dream world, is a little frightening to them because it didn't seem real. And you can say they spend the rest of the play proving it is real. And the only way they can prove it is by dying for each other. Now that's the dilemma that Helena and Hermia and Demetrius and Lysander have backed themselves into here. That they've achieved their dreams, but it's now starting to seem crazy. And orders breaking down in connection with it. And it really focuses on Helena here, that give her dreams, and somehow it's not satisfying because it seems unreal to her. And she questions, why, Lysander, why do you love me? And then Demetrius, why do you love me? And then Hermia shows up, and she thinks Hermia can explain all this. But to Hermia, it looks like Lysander and Demetrius have betrayed her and transferred their affections to Hermia. And so now we start to get tension between Hermia and Helena, and they start fighting as well. They actually ruin the opportunity in the film. Hermia and Helena should get into a real catfight in that scene, and Demetrius and Lysander should have to be separating them. I was very disappointed. That's the one scene that really disappointed me in this film. It's hilarious on the stage when they have to break Hermia and Helena up. But when you get the kind of purely irrational love you wanted, all hell breaks loose. And so a very interesting thing happens in this scene on page 56. This is Act 3, Scene 2, line 418, where Lysander says, "Come, thou gentle day." I want you to see what a transformation this is. We've been seeing lovers have been wishing for night, for obvious reasons. Falstaff was wishing for night. All the partisans of Eros wish for night. Night is the realm of Eros, where Eros reigns supreme, where your desires reign supreme. And then suddenly, these lovers have had a little too much of night, a little too much of the chaos of night. So Lysander says, "Come thou gentle day." And then further down on page 56, Demetrius says, this is Act 3, Scene 2, about line 427, "If ever I thy face by daylight see, now go thy way, by day's approach look to be visited." He's invoking the day. And then top of 57, Helena says, "O weary night, O long and tedious night, abate thy hours, shine comforts from the east, that I may back to Athens by daylight." And line 446, Hermia says, "Here will I rest me till the break of day." Shakespeare sets these things up and then exploits them fully. We've created the world of nighttime and dreams, and he shows the lovers reject it. It has gotten out of hand here. They're looking to see order restored. That's very important to understand about Shakespeare, and I've been talking about, this turn to nature that the play turns on entering the forest world here, and that is true. Premise of this play is the community has gotten out of whack with nature, and we somehow have to get back to nature, somehow restore our connection to nature, but we're not going to stay in the forest. This isn't Rousseau. Here in Shakespeare. This isn't the state of nature as a superior condition. Here we're going to have to talk a lot now about nature in Shakespeare, especially when we get to King Lear. But basically, Shakespeare is not a primitivist. His notion isn't that you reject the city completely, that you reject conventions completely. You want to rejuvenate conventions. You want to bring the city back more in touch with nature. But if you just abandon the city, you get the chaos that we see in Act 3. You get the violence, you get the insecurity, the sense that love itself loses its value when it's so irrational, when it's purely irrational and dreamlike. And so the whole movement of this play is to get the lovers back to the city and restore some kind of order for the plays. As a result, the lovers have to recognize that there was something dreamlike about their experience that they want to now reject. And the main problem with the dreamlike experience is the insubstantiability of it. It's insubstantial. That's its problem, because they can't believe what happened to them. It was so much like a dream. Now, if you turn to page 66, you'll see what happens on their way back to the city. This is page 66, Act 4, Scene 1, about line 189. Remember, they've woken up out of this drug-induced stupor here. And Demetrius says, these things seem small and undistinguishable, like far-off mountains turned into clouds. Methinks I see these things with parted eye when everything seems double. By the way, that's the key to the comedy there, just double everything. So methinks, and I have found Demetrius like a jewel, mine own and not mine own. And Demetrius says, are you sure that we are awake? That's an uncanny feeling when you don't even know whether you're awake or not. It seems to me that yet we sleep, we dream. Do not you think the Duke was here and bid us follow him? Yes, and my father, and Hippolyta, and he bid us follow to the temple. Why, then we are awake. Let's follow him, and by the way, let us recount our dreams. The solution to their dilemma, to get fancy, is intersubjectivity. They've entered a world that was too purely subjective, in which everything was colored by the force of eros, in which everything was a kind of dream, but that was insubstantial. It wasn't real for them. It was too dreamlike. They seemed to enter a world where all their normal expectations were thwarted. Suddenly, Helena's confronted the fact that not only does Demetrius suddenly love her, but Lysander too. And she tries to get things cleared up by talking about the stuff to Hermia, but Hermia confirms what's going on as well, and they get into a fight. The only way they can feel that they're in the real world again is if there are other people in the world, the authority figures like Duke Theseus and Hermia's father, and if they can compare their dreams. It seems to me that yet we sleep, we dream. Do not you think the Duke was here? And once someone else says, oh yeah, the Duke was here, and Hippolyta, and so, why then we are awake. They've re-entered the normal world, the conventional world. They've gone into the night world, the dream world, and it was the world they dreamed of, where Eros could reign supreme and in a pure form. Turned out it wasn't what they were hoping for. It was too much for them. And it's interesting, it begins with Demetrius saying, these things seem small and undistinguishable, like far-off mountains turned into clouds. This gives them a kind of detachment, almost, I'll say, a philosophical detachment from what's happened to them. When they're in the dream world, they're completely wrapped up in it, and it's violent. But this violent shaking up has left them with a kind of detachment that, this stuff is maybe unreal, these passions are unreal, and maybe we've got to get ordered back into normal society. In other words, they begin feeling oppressed by their social roles, by being told what to do by the city. In that forest, they learn there's something to be said for political order. There's something to be said for the world of convention and the world of fathers, and the world of marriage, for example. That's what marriage is. It's a way of giving the seal of convention, the seal of society to the love between a man and a woman, that way they know their family supports it, the community supports it. These are not tragic figures. And here we see them make the opposite of the choice that Romeo makes. They do not choose death. Lysander and Demetrius don't fight to the death. Helena and Hermia don't fight to the death. They'd rather have a stable order than live in that world of pure eros that consumes Romeo and Juliet. Now, Shakespeare illustrates this by the purest and most remarkable love in all of his plays, namely the love of Titania and Bottom. Nowhere else in Shakespeare does an ordinary human being have a goddess fall in love with him, and nowhere else in Shakespeare does a goddess fall in love with an ass. This is the purest love because the most completely irrational love. It's a brilliant touch in the play and the most interesting way in which the different parts of it are woven together. Bottom's a fascinating character. It is, in some ways, Shakespeare's most complex portrayal of an ordinary man. And Bottom is at the bottom. He is at the bottom of the social order, and yet he has great aspirations. We see this in the casting of the play. These rude mechanicals are going to put on a play for Duke Theseus, and when this is on page 13, so Act 1, Scene 2, about line 23, when Peter Quince tells Bottom, "You are set down for Pyramus," his question is marvelous. What is Pyramus, a lover or a tyrant? Now, first of all, Bottom assumes he's the star of the theater company, so he must have the major role of the play, and the major role has got to be a lover or a tyrant. That is very insightful. Eros or Thumos. The hero of the play is going to either manifest Eros like a lover or Thumos like a tyrant. The most interesting characters in drama are lovers or tyrants, and indeed Shakespeare's own career shows that. His tragic figures are all either lovers or tyrants, sometimes both, as in the case of Mark Antony. But these are the kind of characters that audiences really go for. Characters of the grand passions. Lovers give great emotional speeches. Tyrants give great rousing speeches. And Bottom knows that, and he's all set to play the part of Hercules as it is, or he could be more condoling. But in any case, he assumes if the play is going to be about either a lover or a tyrant. And if you look at the drama of Shakespeare's contemporaries, most of the heroes are either lovers or tyrants in them. However, so Bottom's pleased with the part of Pyramus, but then he hears this another character play, Thisbe. So page 14, line 52. And I may hide my face, let me play Thisbe too. And pretty soon it turns out he wants to play all the parts. And that turns him into the pure tyrant. Shakespeare's play Coriolanus the hero Coriolanus is charged with being a tyrant, where it said of him, "Where is this man that would depopulate the city and be every man himself?" Wind himself into a power tyrannical. The sense that the tyrant is the figure who wants to be everybody. He's so concerned with his preeminence, he wants to be everybody. So it's a very interesting insight here into the nature of drama, that what appeals to audiences are parts like lovers and tyrants, and what the actor gets to do is develop his sense. He gets to play being a lover or a tyrant, to play it having these grand desires, and it's another sense of play acting, playing a role. Bottom will get to play out his desires, and of course things work out, so he gets the real thrill that the queen of the fairies, Titania, falls in love with him. It is a remarkable romance. He adapts very well to it. Pretty soon he's behaving like a tyrant, like an oriental potentate. He has all these fairies at his service and he commands them to do things for him, though mainly he'd like some hay to eat. And it's this marvelous experience to have the queen of the fairies fall in love with you. Indeed, it's to transcend the human condition entirely. He becomes like a god here. A goddess has fallen in love with him. And notice it occurs outside the city. Now, there's a marvelous sentence in Aristotle in Politics, Book 1, where Aristotle's trying to define the city. And he says, a man without a city is either a beast or a god. By which he means someone who could exist without the rest of humanity, who could exist without the social existence of the city, would either have to be lower than ordinary human beings or higher than them. He either would have to be lower in the sense that he couldn't develop human potential, or he'd have to be higher and be above ordinary human potential. In particular, Aristotle argues, this is when he's defining the city in Book 1 of the Politics, that human beings have speech. They're characterized by speech, and that makes them social animals. Or as he puts it, man is a political animal, by which he means man is that animal whose nature it is to live in a polis, to live in a city. And we need the city to develop our nature. And if we didn't need the city, it would either be because we're beasts and not capable of speech, not capable of rising to human level, or somehow above it, the way a god would be. Well, it's very interesting that when Bottom leaves the city of Athens, he becomes both god and beast at the same time. There's something godlike about his state, with the fairies under his command, and he's a rival to Oberon. On the other hand, he's rather bestial. And again, he senses how marvelous hairy he is. And then it all disappears. And we see that the most perfect experience of love here, having a goddess fall in love with you, would be imperfect because it would be unreal. You have no way to believe in it. It's so much beyond your dreams. And so we get Bottom's dream. This is on page 66. So the end of Act 4, Scene 1, about line 203. When Bottom awakes from this dreamlike state, and he still thinks he's in the play, when my cue comes, call me, and I will answer. My next is most fair Pyramus. Hey ho, Peter Quince, flute, the bellows mender, snout the tinker, starveling. God's my life, stolen hence and left me asleep. I have had a most rare vision. I have had a dream past the word of man to say what dream it was. Man is but an ass, if you go about to expound this dream. Methought I was, there's no man can tell what. Methought I was, and methought I had, and he's thinking of his ears here, his ass's ears. But man is but a patched fool if he will offer to say what methought I had. The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, man's hand is not able to taste, his tongue to conceive, nor his heart to report what my dream was. I will get Peter Quince to write a ballad of the dream. It shall be called Bottom's Dream, because it hath no bottom. And here it is, the experience is fading away already. For one shining moment, he was beloved by the queen of the fairies, but now it seems just like a dream. And why is it like a dream? Because he can't tell anybody about it. We see that in the very next scene. So page 68, the end of Act 4, Scene 2, Act 4, Scene 2, line 29. When he rejoins his fellow tradespeople in Athens, masters, I am to discourse wonders. But ask me not what, for I tell you I am not true Athenian. I will tell you everything, right as it fell out. Let us hear, sweet Bottom, not a word from me. And why can't he tell them? Because they would laugh at him. He's going to tell them the queen of the fairies fell in love with me when I was transformed into an ass. See, in some ways, true lovers have to be willing to appear ridiculous. they have these remarkable irrational experiences. And they do want to communicate them and say how wonderful love is, but Bottom realizes he's not a true Athenian. He can't re-enter the city if he wants to be this Aristotelian man without a city who achieved godhood at the same time as he achieved bestiality. And indeed, he hoped that Peter Quince would write a ballad of it. He said, as if the only thing that can convey this experience was poetry. And Bottom is incapable of poetry. Now, to show how weird this experience is and how un-Athenian it is, Shakespeare builds a biblical quotation into the speech. Back on page 67, Act 4, Scene 1, about line 214, the eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen. This is a quotation from 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. So again, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. But as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. So this passage in the New Testament is a passage about the mystery, the divine mysteries. The wisdom of this world is foolishness. The wisdom that God teaches us is divine. By the way, this passage itself is a quotation from the Old Testament, from Isaiah chapter 64, verse 4. So again, Isaiah 64, 4 and 1 Corinthians 2, 9. This is the kind of weird thing that Shakespeare keeps doing, to suggest there's some dimension of life that goes beyond the city of Athens here. It's interesting, Corinthians, that just dawned on me, that's written to people in Corinth, and Athens was right near Corinth. That is suggesting there's something limited about this world that Bottom lives in, and a kind of divine revelation has come into it. A divine being, Titania, has fallen in love with him, but it's incommensurable with his ordinary experience. It's incompatible with his ordinary experience. Just as the lovers discovered that kind of pure, intense, irrational love they wanted was not compatible with the daylight existence they want to lead in Athens. Similar for Bottom here. What we see here in this play, in the structures, these characters are led out of the ordinary world of convention into the world of their dreams, where these magnificent things happen, and yet it turns out they realize how incompatible it is with their civic existence. And unlike Romeo and Juliet, they reject this world. They want to get back to the world of convention. They want to re-enter the safe world. Now, let me stop here, and we've got a couple of minutes for questions. Any questions about this? Okay, then next time we will continue. I may not even get to As You Like It next time, or at least the most I'll get to is Act 1 of As You Like It. But what I want to do is use what we looked at today to sum up the difference between comedy and tragedy, and then go on and look at the role of Duke Theseus in the play, and also of Oberon and Titania.